Daniel and David Carter were twins who looked like perfect reflections of each other, but behind their identical faces hid a rivalry so deep that it ended in betrayal, obsession, and a crime no one in their small town could ever forget. The Carter twins were born only minutes apart, yet those minutes seemed to carry an invisible weight that followed them for the rest of their lives. Daniel came first, calm and quiet, his tiny hands curling around his mother's finger as if he already understood the comfort of stillness. David came second, louder, restless, and demanding attention from the moment he entered the world. For their parents, the twins were a blessing, two identical faces that brought laughter and joy into the household. To outsiders, they appeared inseparable, the kind of siblings who finished each other's sentences and shared every detail of their lives. But underneath the surface, a silent struggle was beginning to grow, one that no one noticed until it was far too late. As children, their similarities became both a charm and a curse. They wore the same clothes, played the same games, and learned the same lessons at school, but comparisons followed them everywhere. Teachers praised Daniel for his careful work and good behavior, while David was scolded for his lack of focus. At family gatherings, relatives pointed out Daniel's patience and called him the responsible one, while David was described as wild and unpredictable. To most, these were harmless observations, but to David, they were sharp reminders that he was never quite enough. The pressure of being identical yet unequal began to carve deep lines in their relationship. Daniel often tried to protect his brother, offering help with homework or covering for him when trouble arose, but his kindness only made David feel smaller. He didn't want a protector. He wanted recognition. With every award Daniel received and every word of praise spoken in his direction, David felt himself disappearing into a shadow that grew larger with each passing year. Neighbors saw only the perfect image of twin boys, but behind closed doors, the tension was undeniable. David's envy began to show in small ways: snide remarks, bitter stares, moments of silence where words used to be. Their parents, busy with daily life, dismissed it as normal sibling rivalry, never realizing that one boy's frustration was slowly hardening into resentment. The bond that was supposed to make them inseparable was quietly unraveling. What made them unique, their mirrored faces, their shared history, became the very thing that tore them apart. Daniel continued to shine, unaware of the storm building beside him, while David carried his jealousy like a secret flame, one that would eventually burn far brighter than anyone could have imagined. By the time the twins reached 16, the difference between them had become impossible to ignore. Daniel excelled in school with an ease that seemed natural, his name often written on honor boards and announced at assemblies. He had recently won a scholarship that promised him a future beyond the small town, something that filled his parents with pride and admiration. They saw Daniel as the hope of the family, the boy who would achieve everything they had dreamed of. Meanwhile, David stumbled through his teenage years, his grades slipping, his temper flaring, and his reputation darkening with every misstep. He had been suspended more than once for reckless behavior, and whispers about him spread through the school halls. Where Daniel was seen as reliable, David was branded as trouble. The imbalance in their lives was more than just perception. It was lived experience. Every single day, at home dinner, conversations revolved around Daniel's successes, while David's failures were met with heavy sighs and quiet disappointment. At school, teachers leaned on Daniel as an example for others to follow, while David was treated like a warning of what not to become. To their parents, these comparisons may have seemed unintentional, but to David, they were constant reminders that he was always second best. The words of an uncle at a family gathering sealed the wound even deeper when he proudly declared Daniel as the son every parent dreams of. That sentence played over and over in David's mind, eating away at whatever patience he had left. Jealousy had long simmered within him, but now it turned into something darker. He began to believe that his problems were not his own making, but the result of Daniel's existence. If Daniel weren't there to shine so brightly, David thought, maybe he would finally be noticed. His attempts to sabotage Daniel's image were desperate but clumsy. He ruined homework, whispered lies about him to classmates, and even tried to create situations where Daniel would look guilty. None of it worked. Each attempt seemed to backfire, reinforcing Daniel's reputation as the responsible and innocent twin. The anger that burned in David's chest was no longer about wanting to be equal. It became about wanting to erase the comparison entirely. The idea that he could never outshine his brother grew unbearable. In his mind, There was only one solution, one way to finally step out of the shadow he had lived in all his life. That thought, once dangerous and unthinkable, began to take root, and once it took hold, it refused to let go. The autumn evening seemed calm, with a soft chill settling over the Carter home. Their parents had gone to visit relatives, leaving the twins alone in the house. It was a situation that might have felt ordinary to anyone else, but to David, it felt like the chance he had been waiting for. The quiet halls and empty rooms offered him both freedom and danger, and he carried within him a plan that had been taking shape for weeks. While Daniel sat at his desk in his bedroom, bent over his books as usual, David moved silently through the house, his mind racing with thoughts he could not turn back. From outside, nothing seemed unusual. The neighbors saw the lights on, the faint glow of two windows lit against the dark sky, but inside, the atmosphere was charged with tension, though Daniel remained unaware. His world was filled with schoolwork and dreams of the future, never suspecting that the brother who shared his face and his childhood now saw him as the obstacle to everything he wanted. David's jealousy had twisted into something colder, something he believed would free him once and for all. The night stretched on slowly. Each tick of the clock echoed through the rooms, amplifying David's resolve. The thought of hesitation barely crossed his mind anymore. He had convinced himself that what he was about to do was not just an act of anger, but a way to reclaim the life he thought had been stolen from him. In his mind, Daniel's success was the chain around his neck, and removing it was the only way forward. When the silence of the house was broken hours later, it was not by shouting or cries for help, but by the eerie stillness of something final. Daniel was gone, found lifeless in the very room where he had been quietly working. The scene had been arranged to suggest a tragic accident, carefully crafted in a way David hoped would erase suspicion. He wanted the world to believe that fate had struck suddenly and cruelly, leaving him as the surviving twin. By morning, the house was no longer the same. The shock spread quickly. Neighbors whispered, relatives rushed to offer comfort, and the community mourned the promising life that had been cut short. To everyone else, it appeared to be a heartbreaking tragedy. To David, it was the completion of a plan he had carried alone, a secret victory he believed would finally bring him the recognition he had craved all his life. At first, grief wrapped itself around the Carter household like a heavy fog. The town gathered to mourn Daniel, the bright twin whose future had seemed limitless. Flowers piled on the family's doorstep, sympathy cards arrived in stacks, and whispers of such a terrible accident echoed through the streets. Neighbors offered casseroles, teachers shared memories, and friends cried openly at the sight of his empty chair in class. David, for the first time, became the center of attention. He was the surviving twin, the boy everyone pitied. People spoke softly to him, offered comfort, and treated him with a tenderness he had never known before. For a short while, David basked in what he thought he had always wanted. But the glow of sympathy began to dim when small cracks appeared in the story. Investigators studied the scene carefully, and their findings did not match the picture of an accident. The placement of objects in Daniel's room, the inconsistencies in the timeline, and the unnatural calmness in David's voice when he had called for help all raised silent questions. Detectives who had seen countless tragedies recognized the signs of something more deliberate. David's behavior, too, began to betray him. While others cried and struggled to process the loss, he seemed oddly composed. He attended the funeral with dry eyes, delivering words that sounded rehearsed rather than heartfelt. To the community, grief often showed itself in unpredictable ways, but to investigators, his lack of genuine sorrow stood out like a red flag. As days passed, friends and classmates came forward with uneasy stories. Some recalled how David often spoke bitterly about being overshadowed by his brother. Others remembered moments when he had hinted at hating the comparisons that followed them everywhere. A few even admitted they had once dismissed his darker comments as jokes, never believing he might mean them. Each testimony added weight to the growing suspicion that Daniel's death had not been a tragic accident at all. Forensic evidence soon confirmed what whispers had already begun to suggest. The signs of deliberate staging were clear. The picture David had painted was falling apart piece by piece, leaving behind a chilling truth. The surviving twin, the boy who had been showered with pity, was no longer seen as the victim. Instead, he was becoming the focus of an investigation that threatened to reveal the darkest secret the town had ever witnessed. When the investigation reached its conclusion, the truth spread through the town like wildfire. The community that had once pitied David now looked at him with disbelief and horror. In court, he appeared calm, his identical features reminding everyone of the brother he had taken away. The prosecutor painted a picture of a young man consumed by jealousy, someone who had lived in his twin's shadow until he decided to erase it forever. Every piece of evidence, the staged room, the contradictions in his story, the testimonies of friends built a case that was impossible to ignore. David's silence during the trial only added to the unease. He neither denied nor explained his actions, sitting with the same expression he had worn since the night of Daniel's death. The trial drew crowds from near and far, all eager to understand how a boy could turn against the one person who shared his face, his history, and his very identity. Psychologists spoke about rivalry, about how comparisons between siblings can twist into something dangerous if left unchecked. Journalists wrote headlines that made the case sound almost unreal, calling it the mirror crime and the tragedy of the Carter twins. Behind every article and every broadcast was the same haunting question: how could envy between brothers end in something so final? When the verdict was read, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. David was found guilty, his fate sealed not just by the evidence, but by the story that had unfolded around him. The sentence ensured he would spend his life behind bars, a place where the shadow he once despised would follow him in memory forever. For the Carter family, the pain was unbearable. They had lost one son to violence and the other to his own choices. The house that once rang with the laughter of twins became a place of silence and sorrow. The town, too, was left scarred, unable to forget that behind the familiar smiles of the two boys they had watched grow up, something dark had been brewing all along. David's attempt to escape his brother's shadow only ensured he would live in it forever. In trying to erase Daniel, he had defined himself by him more completely than ever before. The story of the Carter twins became a chilling reminder that envy can twist love into hatred, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not a stranger, but the person who shares your own reflection.